This next story didn't get a lot of attention, but on the 7th of June, over 60 countries put pen to paper on a multilateral tax treaty, which according to the OECD will prevent treaty abuse. Now, simply put, that's a situation where a company uses double taxation agreements and shell companies to drastically reduce its tax bill in the countries in which it operates. Economies across Africa are estimated to lose anywhere between $50 to perhaps $30 billion a year. A big portion of that is through tax avoidance and evasion. Earlier on, I spoke to Alex Cobham. He was the CEO of the Tax Justice Network. I asked him if this treaty, which 5 African countries signed yesterday, does enough to stop the entire legal practice of tax avoidance.
It's serious progress for both technical and political reasons. In terms technically, in terms of the substantive content, this instrument goes a long way to addressing the weaknesses in the current arrangements. So, for example, it promotes the inclusion of anti-abuse rules, which should be seen as essential for any tax treaty, but are often absent from existing bilateral treaties. But politically, the reason this instrument is important is that it should really reduce the extent to which powerful states, powerful countries are able to extract concessions from, say, lower income countries when they're negotiating tax treaties.
Right. Let's talk about specific countries. The United Kingdom, which is one of the signatories to this treaty yesterday, but it's often criticized for not doing enough to actually push its overseas territories, like the British Virgin Islands, for example, to stop them being used as tax havens. It's also criticized for its stance on things like country-by-country reporting.
So the UK's role in general in respect of tax and financial transparency is highly problematic. If you count all of the overseas territories and crown dependencies together with the UK, it would actually come at the top of our financial secrecy index, which is the global ranking of tax havens, if you like. Now, what the UK does is it looks to promote transparency in certain areas, while at the same time, especially under the current government, positioning itself as something of a tax haven in other areas. So in this particular instrument, we are quite concerned about the UK's position. On the one hand, the UK played an important role in the process of creating the instrument, but at the same time, it's actually refused to give up key elements of its own tax rules. For example, an important example is that it's expressed a reservation about the anti-abuse provision with respect to permanent establishment. Now, the significance of that is that the UK will become, or is looking to position itself aggressively as an attractive place for multinationals to have their residence, while they're seeking to minimise their foreign taxes elsewhere. So the risk is the UK will actually contribute to undermining the tax base of other countries.
The United States are pretty conspicuous by its absence from signing this convention, but in many respects, especially the secrecy laws in places like Delaware, for example, it is really a tax haven in practice. How big a player is it in this business of multinational tax avoidance?
Well, the United States comes in third as the third biggest concern in the financial secrecy index. But the way it's been positioning itself lately, we expect to see it move up in the new edition out early next year. What the US has done, in addition to the kind of anonymous company ownership that's possible, indeed actively promoted, they've also resisted all kinds of multinational transparency measures, including public country-by-country reporting, which would show the difference between where multinationals' activity takes place and where they're declaring their profits. Now, the fact that the US has refused to sign this multilateral instrument is an interesting development. In some ways, it's just one more step in the US giving up international leadership in setting tax rules. But given that the US policymakers, as we speak, are bringing forward what could be a very dramatic tax reform, what we're going to have to see over the next year or so is how that plays out in respect of this international instrument. It may be that the reforms that go through are really in violation of what a lot of the rest of the countries of the world have just agreed. And then we'll be looking at whether countries are actually willing to take countermeasures against the US